We'd like now to ask our panel of experts to join us in the platform, so maybe you can start moving forward. Facilitating this panel is former Los Angeles City Councilwoman and City Controller Wendy Greuel, who currently serves as the Vice Chair of the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority Commission. She'll be joined by Ken Kraft, CEO of Hope of the Valley, Latina Jackson, Deputy Director of the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, and Stephanie Klasky-Gamer, CEO of Los Angeles Family Housing. So if you'd come forward and take a seat, and then Wendy's going to start with a short presentation, and then we'll be asking questions of the panelists.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry. One of the things I learned during COVID was that I needed hearing aids, just saying. So I'm not that old, but there you go. I realized I was lip reading to a lot of people until everyone had masks on. So now I can hear you. If you thought I didn't answer a question when you said hello to me, now you know why. But good morning, everyone. And I just want to thank Carrie Morrison, which I'm not sure, she's in the back there, but Carrie and I have known each other for a very, very, very long time, prior to being as engaged on the issue of homelessness. But I am such a big fan because Carrie took a problem and an issue that was, in some ways, a business issue in their neighborhood and made it more than that. It was a social issue, it was a calling, and she has been someone who has not just said, I'm going to just walk by. I'm actually going to engage at a very micro and macro level, and has really changed the way so many people think about homelessness in Los Angeles and beyond. So I want to thank you, Carrie. And I want to particularly talk a moment, just, one thing that you said was that individuals, the homeless, they have a name. And it used to be you'd call them the homeless. And then it was persons experiencing homeless, because they are people. They each have a story. They each have a place where they came from. And they each have a different kinds of components as to how they got on the streets of LA. And so you'll hear today from three experts that really are there on the streets every single day, who I believe have many of the solutions we need to support and engage and to be able to listen to them. As mentioned, I am Vice Chair of the LA Homeless Service Authority. I have jokingly said to Mayor Garcetti that he put me on that commission to punish me for us running against each other, because it's the hardest one. But one that I have cared about deeply, because many of you know I started my kind of career working for Mayor Bradley and worked on the issue of homelessness. And in fact, there was a lawsuit that was in the late 80s, early 90s, where the city sued the county of Los Angeles on the issue of homelessness. And after that lawsuit was settled, and one of the concepts was the creation of a joint powers authority, now known, of course, as the LA Homeless Service Authority. And so it just briefly, and Carrie mentioned this too, LASA, a lot of people think we are in charge of everything. I'm here to tell you we are not. And there's a lot of discussion today about who is in charge of the issue of homelessness, who is responsible, who is accountable, how do we look at that particular issue. And there is a Blue Ribbon Commission on Homelessness, which I'm proudly serving with Sarah Dussault, who we both serve on the LASA board, but now are serving on this LA County Blue Ribbon Commission on homelessness. And there is a governance report that was done by the City of LA. If you want lots of reports and things about how to change things, you look at those reports about what governance looks like. For me, governance is only one piece. It is about where you're putting the funds and how you address the issue of homelessness. So I wanted to just briefly, before we bring the panelists up, just kind of go over two brief areas. And the first is a little bit of 2020 was the last time we did a full homeless count. And I will make a pitch for all of you that are here. You'll remind me, it's like January 17th, Stephanie? 16th, we'll give you the dates, where there's the homeless count. And, prior to COVID, we had more than 7,000 people across Los Angeles County that helped go and actually help us count the homeless, so we had some idea of the numbers. And as a requirement of HUD that we do it every other year, the city and county have decided in LASA to do it every single year, except, of course, for last year. During COVID, we really only did those that were sheltered in some of the numbers without going out in the streets. So the first figure here is that there's about 151,000 people who are experiencing homelessness. 66,436 in LA County. Carrie had that in her slides as well. 1 in 4 are here in LA County. Across the country, there's 568,000. Next slide, please. This is, we talked about that the number of people experiencing homeless, 41,000 in the city and 66,000 in the county of Los Angeles. Next slide. So this talks just a little bit about the components, and there's a lot of discussion about what percentage are mentally ill, what percentage are substance abuse, how many are economic realities, what is the composition from gender and ethnicity. And so you'll see here, again, this is 2020, so I just make a wild guess, they have not gone down from then. They're about this number. So you'll see in the numbers where the increases in the different areas here on the issue of homeless. So there's LA County and then LA City. So we did see a large number of transitional aged youth that have increased. Part of that was a little bit about how we counted it, but also just increase. 62 plus, veterans, families. And then when you look at the population specifically for those in the ethnicity, we continue to talk about the Black African American community, where they're a huge portion of the population, and yet they are only 9 to 11% of overall population, but in the homelessness, it's a 33.7%, as you see in the county. And one of the things that LAHSA did is we did 2 ad hoc committees, one on women experiencing homelessness and one on Black people experiencing homelessness, in a way to address some systematic issues that may have caused those numbers to be as they are. Next slide, please. This just is a little bit about gender, but primarily what you are looking about is 67% are male, 32% are female, and then non-binary in the 0.4%. Next slide. 59% of newly homeless cite economic hardships as main reason for them being homeless. And we talk about the numbers from the last count and the fact that we housed more people than we'd ever housed, and yet we had more homeless because inflow was greater than anything. And that prevention is such an important part, and I'm going to ask my panelists today to talk a little bit about that, because we don't talk about that enough. Because what would happen if you had an individual or a family who just needed 2 months' rent because they just lost a job, but they've got something coming, or they had a healthcare crisis, and they could stay in their home and not become homeless? That is a very good investment in prevention compared to what you would have to spend when they become homeless and then are having to go into some of the shelter system and are, as well. You'll see, okay, well, you did see that, but it had the social network, health condition, system discharge. This is the prevalence of substance abuse and mental disorders. Like I said, there's been a lot of conversations about what those numbers are, how real are they. I always say, if you weren't mentally ill before you came on the streets of Los Angeles, or weren't a substance abuser and became homeless, it is more likely than not that those are some of the impacts that will occur as you're on the streets. So you see the numbers here, prevalence in adults, and the increase in substance abuse, mental health. Next slide, please. So a lot of people say, and I will just, in some conversations with elected officials, and as a recovering politician, I totally get it, but a lot say, these homeless people, they're new. They've all moved here from somewhere else. We have sunny weather, like we've had in the last few weeks, in the middle of November, December, and they're all coming here. When in fact, 80% have been there greater than 5 years. 80% have been in this region and live here. And, we talk about, for example, Skid Row. And others would say, well, they're all in Skid Row and they came to Skid Row. And you're like, you know what? No one was born and raised in Skid Row. Most not. I mean, there may be some today that, for whatever reason, but it is generally, they came from somewhere else. And they came from somewhere else usually in the city or county of Los Angeles, and sometimes are moving out to various places, additionally where they were born or raised, for some kind of support system, some normalcy, some understanding of that. The only other slide which I missed not putting, I somehow got it missed in here. I wanted to, so we can turn that off now, and I'm going to ask my colleagues to come up as I kind of finish in this part, but was by service planning areas. So there are 8 service planning areas in this region, and particularly for the San Fernando Valley, the count results was 9,274. Antelope Valley was 4,755. And so you see that is the regions that we have here. If you want to come on up here. I don't say Latina yet. She may be here somewhere. I just haven't she maybe have her mask on. But I see Ken. So I want to just briefly, before we start the conversation, and this is really going to be, we want to have an interaction, and I was hoping I might, if I could, I'd put my chair down right here and sit with them, because I want it to be informal. But if you haven't read all of the stories this week on the poll that was done by the LA Business Council and by the LA Times, it is really, I think, an important read, and some of the changes in people's positions and things that they have felt. So I want to highlight a couple things that I saw in those. There's a feeling of frustration. How many of you feel frustrated? Impatient? Disappointed? Okay. So 4 in 10 feel unsafe in relative to the issue of homelessness. There's a huge fear of people that personally feel that they could fall into homelessness, a huge amount. And additionally, there are 4 in 10 who know someone who's homeless or themselves have been homeless. That is 1 in 2 in African American voters. 94%, now those of us, and I'll look at my current elected officials that are here and recovering, that are here from some cities. When you do polling, nothing's at 94%, okay? 94% see homeless as a serious problem in this poll, 94%. 79% said homelessness is worse. Today, there was an article, I think it was today, about voters supporting the right to shelter, leery of new taxes, but there were some things that were important as we look at how to solve the problem and where people are. So a majority of voters see major institutions, including local, state, and federal governments, homeowner associations, and the media, more as part of the problem than part of the solution. How many would agree with that? Okay, not as much as I thought. Overall, only advocacy groups and providers got an overall positive rating. And at the same time, only 13% of the voters said they knew a lot about what local governments have done to combat homelessness, and while 40% said they knew very little. The 2 policies that voters supported were housing homeless people in existing buildings, 81 support, and building communities of tiny homes to provide temporary housing with on-site service, 80%. 2/3 supported temporary renting hotels or motels to address homeless individuals. And Fred Gaines and I were talking there briefly as we were sitting there, and I've been around long enough as well as I think of 2 of my colleagues here, that because I worked at HUD at a certain point in time on homelessness, and the change from it being, as Carrie mentioned, that ladder up there, shelter, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, and that there were policies that said we need to focus more on affordable housing and permanent supportive housing, which I 100% agree that we have to focus on that. The problem was that it wasn't built fast enough to be able to say we didn't need transitional housing, because the best situation is for someone who can't immediately move into permanent housing because of the services they need, mental health, et cetera, that they then can be in that transitional and get ready to go to the right place. But what happens is everyone is stuck in that temporary housing because there isn't enough permanent housing that is being built. And so, as Carrie said, I don't know if it's A, B, or C, or what we need to do. It's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, you keep going, all of those things that we have to be able to do. And so I'm just so happy to have Ken Kraft and Stephanie Klasky-Gamer and hopefully Latina Jackson is coming from the County Mental Health Department as well to talk about not only what they are doing, but some of the solutions, and we have some questions, but really it is a dialogue. And so I've asked each of them if they could just briefly introduce themselves and a little bit of their history and what they do in their organizations. And I see Ken in front of me, so I'm going to go with Ken first.
My name is Ken Kraft, and I'm the founder and CEO at Hope of the Valley Rescue Mission. Had the privilege of starting the organization 12 years ago. We started very humbly. There was a little church in Sun Valley that let us use their facility. I'll never forget serving the very first meal on a Thursday night, and 22 people showed up. And that was the beginning. And now we do about 1,500 meals a day right now. And over the years, we kept looking at the homeless crisis and saying, where's the niche? Where's the gaps? What can we do? How can we really help create meaningful, lasting, sustainable, scalable solutions? And so just for kind of perspective, we finished 2020 with 9 homeless shelters, and we had 507 beds. As soon as we finish the Trebek Center, we'll actually have 16 homeless shelters, 1,532 beds. So this past year, really trying to respond to the need, and one of the ways that we've been able to do that is through a partnership with the City of Los Angeles and the launching of the tiny homes. And the tiny homes, it's not the end all. It's just part of this continuum of care. It's interim housing, as was previously shared. It brings people indoors. We can help stabilize people, get them the wraparound services that they need while we continue to work to getting them into permanent housing. And so at Hope of the Valley, we are just thrilled to be part of this continuum of care. We are here in our local spa. We're so thankful for the other partners and the leadership, and we're committed to doing everything we can to help people address the underlying issues that led to their homelessness and then ultimately getting them into permanent housing.
Great, thank you. Stephanie.
Good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Stephanie Klasky-Gamer with LA Family Housing. We're not a rescue mission, so just LA Family Housing. Anyway, thank you, Wendy, for giving us all context, and Ken for talking about, I don't think I was there that Thursday night, but I remember when you came to town. And when Hope of the Valley began, there was a very early conversation that we had with each other, and we did talk about what is this full continuum and how do we work together, because that is our homeless delivery system in Los Angeles. It is a continuum of services that is not linear, because people's lives and needs are not linear. And so how do we create a homeless services delivery system that meets people where they're at? Whether it's coming indoors into a tiny home, working with our combined housing navigations, comprehensive case management teams together, and they move into a permanent home. Then they might come back into another interim housing. Then they might, it's fluid. So LA Family Housing, I really liked how you ended your remarks, Carrie. It's about connections, and I would say LA Family Housing has been working throughout Los Angeles for the last 40 years, making connections. Last year we connected with about 11,000 people, and we do that as both a homeless service provider from our street outreach teams to a provider of interim temporary housing. Thank you. Can you hear me better? Sorry about that. Oh, I'm so sorry. You should have yelled louder sooner. As I was saying, LA Family Housing has been working throughout Los Angeles for the past 40 years along this full continuum but every day making connections to individuals and to families. And those connections may come through our street outreach teams, who probably meet with, talk to, connect with a few thousand people a year. And that is throughout the San Fernando and Santa Clarita Valleys, and we also do street outreach in the Antelope Valley. It's through our housing navigators, which are comprehensive case managers, that help navigate that process for somebody into permanent housing. And that navigation may be helping them work through the bureaucracy of the VA to get access to benefits they're eligible for, or it's helping somebody secure higher paying employment, because a fact that most people don't realize is nearly 60% of our participant population are working. They're working. They may also be living with mental illness. They may also be struggling with substance abuse. And they may also be working. But they just can't afford a typical apartment in Los Angeles. So street outreach, housing navigation. We are real estate developers as well. So LA Family Housing has developed, owns, and operates about 27 properties. We have another 13 in various stages of development right now in our pipeline. In the next few years, we will be bringing more than 700 more permanent homes online. So we're real estate developers. We own apartment buildings for very low income and people who have experienced homelessness and would benefit and remain stable and successful in their housing with services on site. In addition, and maybe one of my board members always calls it our secret sauce, and that is our housing stabilization teams. And this is part of the Los Angeles County continuum of services as well. And that is understanding that for folks to remain stable and successful in their housing, stable and successful in this process of transitioning out of homelessness, it is remaining connected to services. I will be the first to always say homes end homelessness. They do. People are experiencing homelessness because we have a 500,000 unit deficit in Los Angeles County for enough homes for everyone, no matter your income level. But to remain stable and successful in that housing, it is staying connected to community, connected to your mental health resources, connected to your medical resources. It is no different than what I need in my life. I probably talk to my mom 4 mornings a week. I have a chronic illness. I take medication for it. If I miss that, my husband calls me, that little pill is sitting on the counter and I gotta go home and get it. I'm not gonna drop off the face of the earth and someone not know. But for so many of our participants, for 66,000 people in Los Angeles County, that's not always the case. And when Carrie reminded us that stopping and making that connection and getting to know Tori's name, that really is where everything begins. The last thing I want to say is I talk very specifically about what LA Family Housing does. But I also want to address who we are. Because who we are as an organization fuels what we do, but hopefully is far more than the people we are serving, and it's about the system we're helping to advance and shape. LA Family Housing is an inclusive and diverse organization, both of the people we are serving and of our employees that work with us, about 475 together. We are working to address the root causes of homelessness, not just the outcome, which is building housing. Yes, we need to build more housing. Yes, we need to work with landlords to help our participants access existing units in the marketplace, few and far between that they are. But the root causes are we have had decades long of land use and fiscal policies, particularly in the city of LA, that has not supported growth. So if you're not building enough housing, it's truly just a supply and demand. So we have to address those issues. But as a society, we have had centuries of discriminatory policies that have kept people out of housing, that have kept people out of neighborhoods. And so what we do collectively on all of those fronts, the systemic discrimination that have kept people out of housing, the local land use policies that don't allow us to build by right and to the density that we need to address our deficit, and the connecting with people. We need all of that to collectively address homelessness.
It's sorry neither of you are passionate about what you're doing. So, yes, let's give a round of applause for those. So we talked about when the panelists got together a week or so ago about how we should do this, and Marianne was very helpful in guiding us. But what was kind of like, what are the questions you all really want us to answer, and people out there? And it's similar to even the polling that we've seen this week. So some of the questions relate to that. The first is, you hear from people, there is plenty of money out there to address the issue of homelessness. It's just not being managed properly. I'd ask you if what you think of that. I know my answer to that, which is there isn't enough, and it's not ongoing, and it is oftentimes with a lot of rules and regulations that limit what these two organizations can do. But Ken, I'll start with you on that. Is there enough money out there that says we can solve homelessness, and it's really just about leadership and solutions?
I know we're, as a nonprofit organization, you can either partner with the government or you cannot partner with the government in terms of funding, and so we have chosen to partner with the government.
And you didn't always do that, though. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but in the beginning, you were kind of, you did not take government money and just did what because you had some ways in which you were able to do that. You didn't have the strings that sometimes are problematic. So I'm curious as to why you made that.
Yeah, and we are a faith-based organization. And when I say faith-based, we're an inclusive faith-based organization. Why? Because we believe in the dignity, the value, the worth of every human being. And I love, on our board of directors, we have people of Jewish faith, Christian faith, Muslim faith, and we're all working together. But we do believe in the value and the dignity of every human being. But at first, all I knew was a background of not engaging with the government, because the government was going to control you and restrict you and limit you. But I thought, let me find out for myself. So I remember having conversations with people in government, and even at Lawson. I said, so if we were to partner with you, what would the limitations be? And they laid them out, and they said, well, you can't discriminate against anybody. I said, all right, I wouldn't do that anyhow. And if you're going to have any kind of religious offerings, it has to be on an opt-in basis. I said, well, okay, I would do that anyhow. And they just laid it out, and I thought, that's how I would operate anyhow. And so I said, why wouldn't we partner with the government to really bring about effective change? And so what I have found for us is our ability to partner with the government has been incredible. And I'm so thankful. But I've also realized that I had a good friend say it this way: when the government pays you to build bombs, they pay you 230% of what the actual cost is. When they pay you to house the homeless, they only pay you 80% of what the cost is. And there's truth to that. And so what we've had to do is, in addition to certain contracts that we've had, is we have 5 thrift stores, and we have social enterprise, and it does about $5 million a year that helps raise revenue to help offset some of those losses. And we do fundraisers, and we have individuals that give. So do I believe there's enough money? I do. Do I believe it's properly allocated? No. And I think that that's what we have to do is make sure that it's properly allocated. When you hear the surplus that the state has, okay, well, can we then use those funds to really address the issue of outreach and engagement, getting people immediately housed while building the permanent supportive housing? But Stephanie, I'm sure you've had plenty of experiences with government and government funding and finances, and so I'll pass it over to you.
I joined the team of LA Family Housing about 15 years ago. And when I came in the doors, we were about a $6 million organization, about 65 employees. Today, we're about $75 million operation and 470 employees. It has grown, but it's grown in every sector. And it's grown because the need has changed. And I would say that the most significant growth came at the end, or November of 2016, the voters approved Triple H in the city of Los Angeles, and in March of 17 approved Measure H. So the influx of those funds, particularly Measure H, was truly like a game changer. But the challenging part is that we unfortunately still operate under a model of scarcity. That's a great example about what you get paid by the government for building a bomb. That's like, ugh.
Yeah, I wasn't sure where he was going when he first said that, though. I was like, oh, we are getting this, yeah, but it's so true.
But we operate under a model of scarcity. If there is one more private foundation or government entity that tells us to leverage what is expected of us, would not be expected in any other sector. And it truly doesn't make any economic sense. If we are not investing, this is not charity. This is an investment in our community, in our infrastructure. We would not hold back what the fire department needs, well, I was going to say schools, but we do hold back what our schools need. We do hold back what our roads need, but we're holding back everywhere. Okay, sorry. We look at our infrastructure, whether it's streets or schools or police or fire, as investments. We look at providing housing as charity, because we are truly based on an individual versus a collective model as a society. And if we are thinking about what each individual needs, sure, if they need a house, they'll get themselves a house. But what about all of those folks who can't, who are working in our service industry, who may be our teachers, who are supporting us as nurses or custodians in our hospitals, who can't even afford the housing that we have in our communities now? But yet we look back to charity to solve that problem, rather than really looking at our public dollars coupled with private dollars and making sound investments so that we cover the full cost to deliver the services and provide the housing our whole community needs.
Well, and one of the things that I was going to ask about was the two kind of new sources of funding, which were game changers, transformative, with Measure H and Measure HHH. And with Measure H, I think it's $365 million a year that comes through the Measure H. And then the Measure HHH was $1 billion for building affordable housing. And as indicated earlier, I appreciated, Carrie, you did a lot of my work for me, that LAHSA does not control that Measure HHH dollars. That is under the Housing Department and a group there, and they've allocated all of those dollars for the housing that's going to be built. But Stephanie always says to me, as you say, leveraging, that when she has a property and there's 5 sources of funding with 5 different rules and 5 different timing, it's going to take you longer, which means it's going to cost you more, and then to find the right location and to be able to do that. But Measure H is only a 10-year, both of them only 10-year programs, and as alluded to in the article today in the Times, talking about the fact that those will end at some point, and how do you deal with that when the public is frustrated. I'm going to go to the next thing, which is the frustration part of people, which is years ago, I'm old enough to remember, you only saw homeless individuals in Skid Row and maybe a few other places. And of course, we now see it all over the city and county of Los Angeles, and particularly encampments. And it is there isn't a day that doesn't go by that someone says to me, have you seen that encampment, or you read it on something, and who are those people, and are they choosing to be there? If we offered them housing, would they go? Ken has been working on the tiny homes, which came really, really quickly. And the one thing that was in that article as well is about people want this to be an emergency response as well as a long-term response, but that how are we doing it quickly? And I would say probably 2 years ago, a tiny village would not have been allowed in neighborhoods or accepted or funded by anyone, and now we do have it. So I would ask you, as we're looking at best practices, and there are a number of encampments in the city, in the San Fernando Valley, I will just say, how are you dealing with that? And as a public who says, I want to be helpful, but I also, I'm frustrated, I can't walk down the sidewalk, I can't, I feel unsafe, whatever the issue is. As you are dealing with the outreach teams that you have that goes out to those locations, what are best practices? And I know both of you are doing this and reaching out to people, but I'd love you to chat a little bit about encampments and outreach in those areas. And I'll go back to you first again, Ken.
Yeah, and I'm going to get back to that, but I think this emergency response is really important, because if there was an earthquake, God forbid, tonight, and all of a sudden we had all these buildings that were red tagged, and we had 60,000 people that were homeless, they couldn't go back to a place of dwelling. I mean, the National Guard would be here within minutes, and they would erect emergency housing to make sure that no Angelino would have to suffer and languish being homeless out on the streets.
And Ken, I'm going to ask you, how many of you here were Northridge earthquake, and you saw that Section 8 vouchers, facilities, all of that happened quickly?
Yeah, absolutely, right? And the Red Cross would be mobilized. So we would have systems, but yet for how many decades have we been saying, this is an emergency. Homelessness is an emergency. But we don't act like it. But I think what I'm seeing more and more is a true sense of urgency. Jeffrey Katzenberg, he came and toured one of the tiny home sites, and he says, let me tell you why I'm here, Ken. And I was very interested, because it's not every day I get to meet Jeffrey Katzenberg. And he says, I'm going to tell you why I'm here. He says, because you needed voter support in order to build this. He goes, you're going to need voter support again if you're going to continue as a whole, our system, to continue to grow and to expand to meet the need. He says, the way I hear it right now, word on the street, people wouldn't vote for it again, because people are fed up. They're tired of taxing themselves and then not seeing the community looking better, but looking worse. And so people are frustrated. But I want to juxtapose that with an announcement from one of our city council members. I was recently at the 5th tiny home site that we were able to open, this one at Whitsett West in North Hollywood. The mayor was there, and Councilman Paul Krikorian. And Councilman Paul Krikorian made the declaration. He said, I can now say there are beds for everybody that is street homeless in my council district. As far as I know, the first city council member to be able to make that declaration. That is huge. But I also know in just the last year, opened up 2 very large interim housing facilities, one on Raymer Street, one in Van Nuys, which we operate, and 3 tiny home communities. And he also has permanent supportive housing projects going in as well. But because of that, then there's been some other legislation, and then with the city council, there's been some enforcement. And I know that can be controversial. And do I believe in enforcement? I believe in compassionate enforcement. Okay, I believe, like one of the slides said, nobody has the right to die, on the streets of Los Angeles. And I think there's things that we need to address. And so as far as, the outreach and the engagement teams, it is so critical that we treat people with love and compassion and genuine concern. And when the outreach and the engagement teams are going out there to let people know, listen, you know what, there's a better way. And in the biggest challenge, when I first started, 12 years ago with Hope of the Valley, there was virtually no beds available, except for the cold winter shelter. And so cold winter shelter, we'd bus people wherever the location was, and we operate, in Pacoima right now, but we'd bus people there, and then we'd bus them back in the morning, and it was just a rough process. And then the dreaded day of March 30th, okay, we start notifying people in advance. We want you to know that we're going to be shutting this shelter down, so everybody get ready. You're going to be going back to the streets. Women, the elderly. It was just, and honestly, I would cry. It just broke my heart that this can't be okay. How can we, sleep well at night knowing that here's the end solution? Am I thankful for those few months of the cold weather shelter? Did it serve its purpose? Yes, but we have to do so much more. And so, one of the things we say, a lot of Hope of the Valley, and I think it resonates with a lot of people, is do we believe that permanent, supportive, affordable housing is the answer and the solution? Yes, yes, and yes. But the streets can't be the waiting room for permanent housing any more than if I had hypothermia, that you would say, Ken, you just wait in the snow until the doctor can see you. You wouldn't do that. You'd bring me in and stabilize me until you can get me in front of the doctor. And so, it's easy to throw stones at agencies and systems and organizations and all that we're not doing right. But, I'm a bit of an optimist, and I have never seen the city mobilized like it is today. I've never seen the county more energized than it is today. And sometimes it is darkest before the dawn. And I am absolutely convinced if we stay the course with making sure that we continue to build this permanent supportive housing inventory, in the short term, let's get people off the streets. I was walking at one of our tiny home sites just yesterday, and it was in the one in Arroyo Seco, and this guy saw me from a distance. I had never met him, and I had my mask on. And he goes, "I know who you are. You're that guy in the video." And it was just a little video that we put together that kind of highlighted, the value of tiny homes. And he ran towards me, and he gave me this big hug and just held me. And he says, "I just want you to know, you saved my life." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "These tiny homes, they saved my life." And I said, well, how long were you homeless? And he says, "I was homeless for 2 years on the streets." He goes, "I was convinced I was going to die on the streets." And he says, "And now I have hope again." And so that's that hope that I think we all need to have, that we need to look at the progress that's being made compared to where we were. I mean, light years ahead, but we have to continue to look at where we need to go and stay motivated and continue to work on the challenge and the problems.
Thank you, yeah. Stephanie.
So you were talking about yesterday's front page article and the poll that was taken, and how is Los Angeles feeling? Frustrated, all of the negatives. I'm with Ken. I feel hopeful, but I also wake up and feel hopeful, because if I didn't think that we had the right solutions, it would be tough to get out of bed every day. I know we have the right solutions. And there's no doubt in my mind that homelessness is a crisis that responds to resources. If there was a sliver of doubt on that, April of 2020 erased any doubt whatsoever. We had a health crisis, right? The pandemic hit February, March. April 5th, LA Family Housing began operating 5 Project Room Key sites, and in a matter of 3 weeks moved 700 people indoors. Why? Because we had the resources to lease the rooms. We didn't move them inside in 3 weeks because 2 days ago I said, "Do you want to come in?" They said no. Today I said, "Do you want to come in?" "Oh yeah, maybe today." No, it's because I said, "I have a place for you to go." I believe in my total core, nobody chooses to be outside. I think there are a ton of people, Tori of course being one, who might not be ready yet. Years of mistrust, years of untreated mental illness, and I am sorry that Latina's not here, and we'll keep bringing up what we know about
That's
mental
right, mental
illness.
health, yes.
I don't believe there's anybody who chooses to be outside. I do believe that there are people who would say, "I don't want to sleep in a cot 2 feet away from somebody else. I don't want to be separated from my children because they're above the age 16 and I'm their mama, but they're 16-year-old boys, so 16-year-old boys have to go there and they're boys. I don't want to be apart from them. I don't want to be apart from my partner." and we're the same gender, and this particular shelter doesn't allow us as the same gender to sleep together. I think it's incumbent on us as a community to provide the appropriate options that give that same dignity and respect that we need and want in our housing, that we provide that for folks as they're coming indoors. The one challenge I would say, and I love that story about the gentleman who found you and gave you your big bear hug. By our definition, he's still somebody experiencing homelessness. He's sheltered, but he's experiencing homelessness. And I think the challenge we have in terms of public opinion is if we hide people, or if we move them from the freeway off-ramp or from whatever encampment, and you don't see them anymore, you think that they are no longer homeless. But they are, because we have exploded in new interim housing sites. And I agree with you with the example of hypothermia. Of course we want to bring people inside. 75% of people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles County are unsheltered. That's because we have never provided the appropriate amount of interim housing beds. But then the challenge, and we saw it with Project Roomkey, that was never meant to be a permanent program. That was short-term crisis response using FEMA dollars to move a lot of people who were COVID vulnerable inside to be sure that we stopped the spread of the virus so that there would be hospital beds should, God forbid, somebody in need had to access them. But that was a short-term program. The tiny homes were not built as permanent structures. They are temporary structures, yes, for a longer period of time than PRK. But what will we do when they reach their lifetime, whether it's FEMA money is done or the tiny homes are done, whatever it is, if we don't keep pace with the permanent housing solutions for people to move in?
Thank you. No, we're going to open for questions. When I sent a note to them late last night, I said, okay, 45 minutes is going to go like that. It did. So I think we have about 5 to 10 minutes for questions. Yes, sir, and then I'm going to go back to the gentleman there.
This has been quite exciting, but I'm totally confused now, but I'm going to ask this question. Has the government really made the pivot in thinking? Because you seem to be awful hopeful in certain Is it really happening? Is the bureaucratic...
I'll repeat the question. Yeah. So his question was, has the government really pivoted on this issue that you've talked about? Is that for real?
Yeah, I'll jump on that first because, and the reason why I am optimistic is because in 2016 when that bond measure was passed, I think we all collectively cheered, yay, okay, funding, we're gonna build enough, $1.2 billion, 10,000 units of affordable housing. I mean, there was this sense of optimism, we're gonna do this. Yeah, the first one didn't open until January of 2020. And so then the LA Times got a hold of how much money was spent on that actual unit. And I think then the skepticism started to set in and people were, getting frustrated. But the Mayor Eric Garcetti did something in 2018 for which I will eternally be grateful for. And that is he declared a shelter emergency. And that shelter emergency changed the landscape for organizations like Hope of the Valley. Historically, you could only open up a shelter that was zoned C2 or CM for the most part, by right. And you could only have 30 beds or less by right. Okay, and yes, you could get a conditional use permit, but to get the conditional use permit, you have to have public hearings. Everybody comes out, yells and screams, not in my backyard. And it was difficult to make that happen. But when he declared the shelter emergency, now you can be in M1, M2 manufacturing buildings. There is no limit. Okay, that's why Arroyo Seco has 230 beds. Alexandria Park has 210 beds. There's no limit on that. And the third thing that happened is that under this declaration that the city can open up shelters in any zone as long as, number one, either they own the land or number two, they're leasing the land. That's how the city was able to mobilize so quickly to get these tiny homes open. Because the first one was a rec and park site, second one rec and park site, third one was a parking lot owned by the city, the fourth one was Metroland, the fifth one was a relationship between the city and Caltrans, and the sixth one was another rec and park site. And so if someone says to me, do you think the city cares? Absolutely they care. And as a city, has something changed in the city? Yes. You see city council members, you see the county supervisors, people, everyone is taking this challenge, this humanitarian crisis seriously. And that's why just the turnout here today, I think, is people, we want to know, what can we all do to make a difference? But I have nothing but great things to say about the city of Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles. Have we come a long way? Yes. Do we have a long way to go? Yes. Let's stay the course.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll scream. A couple of years ago, I visited friends in Berlin, and they showed me converted freight containers, like 10 across, 4 high, in a number of places, with plumbing on one side. Right now, we're drowning in freight containers. Are we looking at how places like Berlin are doing this? Are we trying to do anything like that here?
So I will say there are some places that have used freight containers. The Vignes site, is it called the Vignes site? Yeah, the Vignes site downtown. There's some others. But the thing that has changed, and again, you all can correct me, but is that there are now more ways in which you can have the already built kind of facilities that may be better than those containers. Doesn't mean you don't use the containers, but sometimes prefab kinds of facilities can come in really quickly, and you don't have to do some of the machinations you might necessarily do with a shipping containers. But I think it's a little bit of both.
Let me speak to that a bit, and to follow up and respond to your question as well. I certainly think there has been a shift in the city of Los Angeles relative to crisis emergency housing. And it's no more evident than where everything is located. So you could drive right along a freeway and you could see a tiny home village there, and you're seeing them pop up everywhere where we had restrictions on where any type of housing could be for so long. Where we have not made any significant changes, in my opinion, and LA Family Housing develops and operates interim temporary housing as well as permanent housing. Where we have not made the necessary changes is in the permanent housing. Where it can be sited, what are the building codes required for it? We have tried every sort of innovative model. So LA Family Housing is doing 180 units of modular housing right now, both in Council District 12 and in Council District 3. We purchased 4 of the Project Home Key sites. Those are the hotels that the city purchased, transferred ownership to us, but then said, good luck in financing it. I went out to privately finance it because, as Wendy was saying, when you have to go after 5 different sources of funding, literally, I did the comparison. Going after 1 source of funding or 5 sources of funding, I saved $4 million per project and 2 years. That's significant. And until the city recognizes that once the land use and finance fiscal policies change, we're not going to go faster or cheaper. So we have to do something different. Sadly, the Project Home Keys, it is a great model. Yes, take existing assets and convert them. That's better than starting from scratch. However, the red tape, we are 1 year we've owned these properties. We received them December 30th, 2020. And we still don't have the building permits to convert them to permanent housing. The city bought them. You would think the city would have expedited something. Maybe this is expediting. But I think we have made a significant change in the interim housing. I think there's different motivators to that. We have not made the appropriate change to permanent. And what will happen is we have a bottleneck. We are not moving people out of interim housing because we don't have a place for them to go.
Let's thank our panelists for being here today and all that they do every day in addressing the issue of the homeless crisis.
Thanks so much. They were awesome panelists and speakers. Thank you, Wendy, Ken, and Stephanie.